thank everyone for showing up this evening for a half-day workshop on Quantified Self. We're going to be moving on with the second panel on business opportunities in Quantified Self and self-tracking space. The next moderator that I'd like to introduce, as well as the keynote, is Rajiv Mehta. He's a graduate student of Stanford, Columbia, and Princeton University. He is also the CEO of Unfrazzled, which is a mobile application platform to empower and help families monitor and manage the health of their loved ones. He is also the co-organizer of Bay Area QS Meetup and the Inspiration Men's event. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rajiv Mehta.
Years ago, at the home of Kevin Kelly in Pacifica, we had the first meeting of the Quantified Self. And about 30 people were there, somewhat surprised that there were that many of us. And the very first speaker got us off on a roll. It was this young guy, and he explained to us that he had been keeping track of his activities down to the 5-minute level for the past 3 years. And in fact, he had very fancy color-coded charts to display all of this information. So it's quite amazing that someone is so persistent, but what really floored us was that after he got done with his presentation, he asked us what value could there be in all of this tracking. And so that, of course, really got the conversation going. The person in the photo who's speaking is Professor Seth Roberts, who teaches at Berkeley and at Tsinghua in Beijing. And he has been doing self-tracking and self-experimentation for decades. The fella in the yellow t-shirt over here with the red letters on the back, that's Tim Ferriss. He since has gone on to write the very best-selling book, The 4-Hour Body, based on all of his own self-experimentation. And I'm the guy out here over there. I also spoke at that. But so that was almost exactly 5 years ago. And what I'm going to share with you today are sort of my observations, my learnings, and 5 particular learnings that seem appropriate for this question of what are the business opportunities in this space. So I'm going to talk about market size, feedback loops, sensors, engagement, and really what value are people getting out of all of this self-tracking activity. And again, this isn't a scientific survey, it's really from the people that I've met over the course of the last 5 years. So starting with this issue of market size, one of the ironies in Quantified Self, since it's all about data, is how much there is a lack of data, a lack of clarity on this issue of market size. As you know, this question of, is this an early adopter market, is it still just a niche with a tiny few people doing it, or is this already mainstream? It turns out the indicators we have on this are quite muddy. So, in terms of the QS experience itself, from that very first meeting, over the last 5 years, we now have nearly 100 QS meetup chapters around the world, including new ones in Bombay and Bangalore. And almost every night of the year, somewhere in the world, there's a QS meeting going on. We've had 4 conferences today, 2 in the Valley, 2 in Amsterdam. We've got the 5th one coming up in San Francisco in a month. And at these things are almost always packed, so the larger the space we get, the more people seem to show up. And most of what happens at these QS meetings is people talking about their own experiences. We ask them, what did you do, how did you do it, and what did you learn? The other question we've been asking for the last couple of years, just initially out of curiosity, but now sort of has become a habit, is we ask people, how many of you are at a QS event for the first time? And it's been roughly half the audience. So there's every time a lot of new people showing up. So clearly this is growing fast. And yet, you know, honestly, if you add up every single person who's attended a QS event anywhere, it's still a tiny, tiny fraction of the population. So in many ways, this is very much early adopter. So here's Gartner's perspective on the topic. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Gartner's very famous hype chart, they plot new technologies from an innovation trigger up to the height of, peak of inflated expectations, crashing down into the trough of disillusionment, before eventually making it to the plateau of productivity. So, apparently those nerdly analysts at Gartner are good with words. So where do they plot QS? As I'll show you, they seem to want to have it both ways. They've got quantified self way on the left, so it's very new. On the other hand, they have it, I'm sure you can't see, but it's with a small light blue circle. A light blue circle indicates that Gartner believes this is going to hit the plateau of productivity in 2 to 5 years. So Gartner seems to be saying that more or less overnight, quantified self is going to go from new to mainstream. And it doesn't seem very realistic. Also, they have mobile health monitoring technologies much further along the cycle, about to really crash, but with a dark blue circle, indicating that they think that's going to take 5 to 10 years before it becomes at the plateau of productivity. So what do you make of this? They're saying that quantified self is going to become mainstream much sooner than the technologies that seem to drive it. So for more confusion, we turn to Pew Research. They do a lot of surveys of the American population. And a recent survey that they published, it came out, I think it was January, February. One of the questions, it was all about surveying people's self-tracking habits. So one of the very surprising things that the report says is that 70% of Americans are tracking at least one health issue. And 70% is pretty darn mainstream. At the same time, about half of the people who say they track don't use technology. In fact, they don't do anything in their head. So when you ask the more specific question of how many of you are using apps or devices to track, it turns out it's only about 11% of the US population. However, 11% seems pretty darn mainstream too. It's certainly far beyond the early adopter population. And we don't see that from our normal experience. So there's been a lot of discussion online as to whether this is still way an overcount. And some people, in fact, are arguing that it's an undercount because if you count the number of glucometers, blood pressure cuffs, scales, etc., that are sold to the home market, it should be much more than 11%. So how do we make any sense of the data? And Pew seems to know what they're doing in terms of surveys and analysis, so there's something really there. One key issue that comes up in sort of coming up with explanations for this discrepancy is that many people who do tracking don't call it tracking. They're just managing their diabetes. They're not tracking their glucose level. So it's not very clear. On the other hand, industry pundits who sell their reports to companies that to build business are always very optimistic. And here's a reasonably modest projection. Some are much higher than that. And Business Intelligence thinks that next year there's going to be 100 million wearable devices sold, and about over half of them are for health and fitness. So that's a real market. And if we take a look at the crowdsourcing front, there's a lot of interesting success stories. Instabeat is actually a company based in Beirut. They're building a little sensor attaches to your swim goggles, so even while you're swimming, you can get a lot of information. You'll hear soon more from Monisha about Lumobac. Beddit is a Finnish company. It's a little ribbon that's so thin it can go under your bed sheets and does an amazingly good job of tracking your sleep very, very unobtrusively. Emotive is a San Francisco-based company. It's got a headset, measure your brain waves. And Scanadu is trying to build a tricorder. They're also another local company. So from at least the popular support that these companies have gotten through crowdsourcing, there is definitely a lot of interest. But the last point I'll make is that this idea of self-tracking, of self-reflection, is not new. The Buddha and a zillion philosophers before and after him have advised us of the value of listening to oneself, of taking time to reflect and make sense of that. So something that's a few thousand years old can hardly be called new. And so in terms of the market size, I think the only way to make sense of these various indicators is that most people are already doing this. They may not call it that, but if you can tap into what people are already doing, then potentially you'll have a very, very large market. So next I want to move to sensors. And sensors are really what sort of got the quantified self movement going in the first place. The availability of cheap, small sensors that we could wear, track our data. You didn't need to be part of the San Francisco 49ers to get something that gave you some information about yourself. And in fact, most of the conversations you have around QS, people are very excited about the opportunities to come in these sensors. We've played with a lot of these things already. Rachel and the other folks told us about what's coming, and this is very, very exciting. All sorts of new things that are nowhere close to the market yet, but we sort of in the QS and places are playing with these things. The other key point to mention about this is that it's not a criticism that people are buying these things because they're shiny new toys and trying things out. If that's what gets people to start paying attention to their health, fantastic. So just don't dismiss them because they're only sort of eye candy. In fact, that's what's getting people into this. But it's much, much more fundamental than that. Marcel Proust, the author, spoke that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And these sensors are just that. Just like the telescope and microscope that came before, these allow us to perceive the universe in ways we couldn't before. We're now seeing things that have always been right in front of us, but we just weren't able to see them before. And so that alone makes a huge difference. We discover new things, we learn new things because we're able to see new things. However, sort of ironically and unexpectedly, using all these gadgets has exposed so many and made us aware that we are human beings that have a bunch of built-in sensors that are amazingly good at times. And we find that in using these sensors over time, we actually become much better able to sense things than we could before. So people who use Fitbit and Bodybug and, I got my Shine on, if you're just doing things on a normal way, pretty soon you just know, okay, today I walked about 7,000 steps. You're not accurate down to 6,957, but who cares? You walked about 7,000 steps. Similarly, people who've used a lot of these sleep sensors have gotten to the point where just from how they feel when they wake up, how groggy they are, how fresh they are, they can tell you what their sleep score is going to be. They no longer need to look at their device. And when we think about it, we find that this skill in perception is commonplace. You go to any good mechanic, he can grab the right wrench, the right screw out of his drawer without getting out his calipers. Anybody who's sort of a visual artist can differentiate between subtle shades of color just using their eyes. They don't need to go get a colorimeter. Piano tuners, everyone I've ever hired seems to just do it by listening. So we have amazingly good sensors when they're trained. And so one of the really key questions around these new sensors, these new devices, is whether they are in fact providing us new eyes or they're simply teaching us to see. And with this in mind, we also have to think about these sensors, these gadgets, in a different way. Is the measure of success whether you continue to wear your device all the time? Or is the measure of success whether the user is now able to perceive their world far more accurately than they ever did before, whether or not the device is on them? The other key issue around sensors, which the earlier panel touched on very, very much, is this issue of making sense of the data. Another novelist, a Danish novelist named Peter Hoeg, said that what we discover in nature is not really a matter of what exists. What we find is determined by our ability to understand. And that's a key thing around these sensors. You get this data, but what does it mean? Is it meaningful? What did it actually measure? How does it compare to what I'm interested in? Should I pay any attention? These are non-trivial questions. Many people looked through telescopes when they were first invented. Only a few, like Galileo, actually understood what they were looking at. And this challenge of making sense of data is not something new to QS. This is prevalent everywhere. Many of you may have heard of Nate Silver. He initially rose to prominence because he did some brilliant baseball analysis, if folks have seen Moneyball, that kind of thing. He later got much, much more famous by writing a blog for the New York Times called 538, in which he was far, far more accurate in prediction election results than any of the pundits. And Nate's written this brilliant book called The Signal and the Noise, where he goes into detail in many, many fields, the challenge of making sense of your sensor data. So on this issue of sensors, I want to have it both ways here. This is incredibly exciting. The sensors that already exist, that are coming out in the labs, are sort of fundamental to some of the improvements we want to see. And yet, not every single sensor and not at every single moment. And if you're going to build a business around sensors and gadgets, keep in mind that you're not sensing a car, this inert piece of steel. You're attaching them to real human beings that have their own senses and their own interpretation of what the data means. Another very exciting meme in the world of quantified self, self-tracking, all this, is the issue of feedback loops. And Wired magazine, as they do so often, really captured the zeitgeist of this in this article in June 2011, written by Thomas Getz, who's just a brilliant writer. He really captured the essence of why everybody's so excited about the issue of feedback loops. I mean, the basic idea seems to be so straightforward. Measure something important, compare it to your goal, adjust something in your life, measure again, and hey, pretty soon you're going to hit your goal. And if you go to Quantified Self meetups and the conference, you'll hear lots of such success stories. And you're going to hear later from Sky, who has his own personal success stories, and he'll tell you about some of the people he's worked with, where they have been able to do amazing things because they've been able to measure things, make changes, and get that feedback loop going. At the same time, the vast majority of QS experiments don't amount to much. Like the vast majority of people that go to Weight Watchers, they don't lose much weight. And as any of you that are part of IEEE know quite well, feedback loops are not a new idea. This wonderful poster from a design firm called WYOD Design sort of just showed that it's the same thing in so many different fields. This is not a new idea. The good thing about that is that we have deep knowledge about feedback loops to help us understand why are there some successes and why are there so many failures. One key point, if you've ever tried to create feedback loops and control systems and so forth, is that the thing that you can control, your actuator, has to have some meaningful impact on the variable that you care about. Otherwise, your feedback loop is really not worth anything. It's like turning the thermostat in your house and hoping the temperature outside is going to change. It just doesn't work. And so oftentimes we find that the controls at our disposal, the ones we have control over, really just don't have any impact on the thing that we care about. And Nate Silver has this nice quote that it's like applying sunscreen and claiming it protected you from a nuclear meltdown. Wholly inadequate to the scale of the problem. And this happens all the time. You care about your weight, and so you get a scale and you get your Fitbit, you start eating your broccoli and walk 10,000 steps, and your weight doesn't change. It could easily be because there are other things impacting your weight, your body's weight set point, that have far more powerful effects on your weight than what you're doing. And your body will simply compensate for all that broccoli and walking it's having to put up with. The other thing about feedback loops is that simple feedback loops are often really no match for complex systems. And one of the issues in many complex systems is the issue of time lags, and our body doesn't do things instantly. What you eat, a change in the environment, doesn't show up instantly on the variable that you're tracking. And it's very sort of exciting to talk about tightening the feedback loop. We'll get more data, faster data, we'll get more responsiveness, and that'll solve all our problems. And this idea that tighter feedback loops are the solution, well, it's usually a recipe for disaster. Donella Meadows, who's written a brilliant book on sort of a primer for understanding systems, talks about the fact that if a decision point in a system is responding to delayed information, the decisions will be off target. Sort of common sense. And if action is taken too fast, it may nervously amplify short-term variation and create unnecessary instability. The point is that time lags play havoc on feedback loops. And many experienced quantified self-trackers, self-experimenters have come to appreciate this. They wait. They track a lot of data. they reflect, they think about it, they do not respond instantly. And in fact, this is a really key takeaway for those of you who might be interested in making businesses around this, that you're going to have some brilliant sensor, you're going to have some wonderful app, and it's going to tell people what to do. Well, it probably won't work. And you're far better off designing products that are going to provide feedback for the user's own reflection. Promise them food for thought. Don't promise them magic answers. Another very popular meme is the issue of engagement, behavior change, motivation, the idea that these apps and devices is going to somehow get you to do what you're supposed to do. And in fact, so many people come to the world of self-tracking, to quantified self, because they have something that they want to change in their own lives that they've struggled to do. So they built their own tools. And the idea is that I'm going to hack my behavior and then I'm going to share my learning with everybody else so that we can together hack yours as well. As it turns out, because of this spirit, there's been tons of experimentation in the world of QS. People have tried, dollars and points that you win when you achieve your goal, that you get penalized if things go wrong. The idea of public commitments because, hey, if lots of people are cheering you on, you're much more likely to succeed. And the shame of public failure will keep you motivated, and so forth. So lots and lots of experiments. Basically, what we've come to learn through all this QS experimentation is that the experts actually seem to know what they're talking about. So one such expert is B.J. Fogg, a professor at Stanford who's a very popular, very influential lecturer and consultant in the space of technology for behavior change. One of the things that B.J. emphasizes is that lack of motivation is almost never the problem. He recommends, if you're going to build tools, don't be building tools to try to change motivation. Build tools to make it easier to do. And BJ has this wonderful chart. He's brilliant at sort of summarizing all this research into things most of us can easily grasp. Points out that a behavior requires motivation as well as ability. And that in practical circumstances, the problem almost is that things are too hard to do. He also emphasizes the importance of triggers, that something has to remind you at the right moment that something needs to be done. So BJ emphasizes that we're spending too much time worrying about motivation when it's really triggers and ability that are lacking. And this is really just a simple summary of decades and decades of behavior research which have basically said that all this excitement around carrots and sticks and external motivations, really, they don't do much. They work a little bit in very rare circumstances. Most of the times they won't get you anything and will likely be counterproductive. And this book by Daniel Pink called Drive is a wonderful lay summary of, honestly, decades of behavior science. The other thing that they say is that if you really want things to happen, make it easier for people to do what they already want to do. And some of the most successful sort of self-tracking, quantified self-types of products have really achieved this. If you go back to the original Nike Plus, that's where had the little gadget that went in your shoe that tracked your running and so forth. Or if you look at very popular apps like MyFitnessPal or Runkeeper, they're all designed to make it easier for you to do what you want to do. They're supporting you, not nagging you. And this is what's really, really key. If you're going to develop products and services in this space, focus on making it easier. Support people's intrinsic motivation. And as Rachel had commented, making it easier includes make it more pleasurable, make it beautiful, make it fun, but make it easier. The last topic is, go through rather quickly, is this issue of value. What value are people getting from doing this thing? And it's surprising. So as I said earlier, if you go to QS meetings, you hear about all these success stories. People have done wonderful things. Well, it's mainly because people like to talk about successes. If you actually talk to them offline, you'll discover that most QS experiments don't really amount to much. People's weight hasn't changed, their sex life hasn't gotten better, whatever it is that they're trying to do really hasn't changed a whole lot. And yet, you sort of ask why. Well, partly because it's hard. We just talked about all of these difficulties with complex systems and devices and so forth. And partly because it's really bad science. We seem to have failed in our attempts at teaching the general public how to do good science, how to do good experiments. It's, most of the QS talks that I hear, they're kind of scary. And yet, when you ask people, well, what do you think of it overall? Most of them seem to have enjoyed doing it. Most of them will tell you that they learned something about themselves. And this is really, really key. They learned something, they enjoyed it because they were involved in what they were doing. They were paying attention to themselves, they were trying things, and so forth. They were really engaged. And we talk about finding the finding, the unexpected discoveries, which only happen if you're involved. So as a couple of examples, a couple of years ago, I started tracking my sleep because I had this impression that I was sleeping really badly and needed to do something about it. After a few months of this, I came to discover I didn't have a sleep problem, but I had a much richer appreciation of the normal ups and downs of life. Another QSer talked about her experiments to try to lower her budget. She felt she was spending too much money on energy in the house. Well, after a few months, it was hardly worth the trouble. But in the process, she came to discover how much she enjoyed sort of the meditative rhythms of line drying her clothes. So even though she's saving no money, her life is much better now. And these things only happen if you allow the user to be involved. So on this issue of value, if you design products that are designed so paternalistically, where all the magic is behind the curtain, it's going to sense this, it's going to tell you what you're going to do. As I've just discussed, it probably isn't going to work anyway. But you've also left out the part that most people are in fact finding really valuable, the engagement with themselves. So if you're going to develop things, I really highly stress this lesson from this guy who was somewhat successful, that the journey is the reward. So just to close, if you want to learn from these early adopters yourself, you're welcome to come. There's meetups all the time. The next one is in San Francisco next week. The conference is coming up in a month. And you'll be hearing from 3 panelists who've been doing this as a business. So thank you. While we're setting things up, let me introduce Monisha Prakash. She is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Lumovac, whose little icon I showed earlier. And she and her co-founders, Charles Wang and Andrew Chang, have been coming to QS from very early on. And so it's been just fun watching their progress. And Monisha herself, she did her undergrad at Yale, Stanford MBA, and has done a bunch of interesting things before this, including AmeriCorps and Siebel. But she's also now on her second successful startup. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to tell you about our company, Lumo Body Tech. So our vision is to give the body a voice. And using smart sensors and software, we can do that. We can help people live healthier lives. We can help them perform better, get more out of their bodies, and get more out of their lives. Our first product is Lumovac. It's a posture sensor and app. And the idea of it was born, the inspiration was born behind my co-founder's struggle with back pain. He had had back pain for more than 10 years and started taking posture classes as a way to potentially relieve his back pain. And he had tried everything from physical therapy and chiropractics and acupuncture and special diets. And of all the things that he tried, these posture classes were the most beneficial. And so that's when the light bulb went on for us. We thought, wow, well, if these posture classes, which are high touch, can have such a profound impact on individuals, can we use scalable technologies to help millions of people the same way that these posture classes have helped Andrew? And so that's where the inspiration for our first product, Lumovac, was born. The way that it works is it's a very thin, discreet band that you wear around your waist. I'm wearing one now, and as you can tell, can't even tell it's underneath my shirt. And how it works is it tracks your posture. as well as your activities. And when you slouch, it vibrates to remind you in real time to straighten up. Because the hard part, one of the key insights we had as we studied posture is remembering. It is the awareness, particularly for those of us who work behind our computers for many hours at a time, which is probably most of us in here. It's simply hard to remember. And so that's how the sensor works. It also connects through Bluetooth to an app on your smartphone. And the app does all sorts of fun tracking as well. So one aspect of that app is this little guy we call Lumo, the avatar. So as you can see, as I'm walking, he's tracking my walking and my steps. If I'm running, he can track that as well. If I sit, he sits, and I'm in very bad posture, and he turns orange and frowny. I just got that vibration on my sensor that I can feel right now. It reminds me to straighten up. So I straighten up, he's nice and green. So you can see as I go through various degrees of slouching, he can capture that. If I slouch forward, can capture that as well. As well as if I'm leaning side to side, we can also track sleeping positions. So in addition to that, we track, so we tell you your metrics on posture. We give you a posture score. So how much of the day are you straight versus slouch? The green is good, the orange is not. What is your sit time? The reason why that's important is sitting is now being shown to be the new smoking. In fact, there's research that shows that beyond a baseline amount of sitting, which is 4 hours, for every 1 hour that you sit, you're shaving 11 minutes off your life. And so, again, awareness is key. So much of what Rajiv said, it's about bringing that awareness to you. So we will track your sit time, and not only your sit time while sitting, but also while driving. So as you can see that dark red, that's my driving time, which was an hour and a half from Palo Alto to here in 101 and 237 traffic. So you can also see that, as well as we track how many times you stood up. If you're somebody who has to sit for long periods of time at your desk, simply standing up makes such a big difference in terms of your blood, your circulation, your digestion, your energy levels. You get hormonal surges that are actually very healthy for you. They give you feelings of confidence. Simply just standing up is important. So that's something we help encourage as well as step counting and calories, as well as sleep. So this is my sleep time from the previous night, and we also track how much you're on your left, your back, your right, and your front. So the idea behind LumoBack, as well as future products that we're rolling out, is that because of these technologies, we have the ability to monitor and quantify your movements to a high level of resolution. And today we're focused on posture, but in the future you'll see us focus on other aspects of biomechanics that relate to getting a better performance from your body, from recovering from surgeries, from rehabilitating, and to feeling more productive. And it's such an exciting time to be in this space right now because the technology is in a place where we can get those insights into our bodies and resolution into our biomechanics. And with those insights, we can turn them into actionable feedback and to behavioral changes. We can also use those insights to inform healthcare and how healthcare is given, and helping doctors to make decisions about how healthcare is also given out. So we're very excited to be in this space, and I'm going to leave my talk at this, and we'll invite questions during the Q&A session.
So our next speaker is Julia Bernstein, and she's brilliant because she only heard about this yesterday, but she's with Ginger.io, and she drives business development over there. And before she came to join Ginger.io, which was just a year ago or so, she was involved in healthcare through McKinsey, after also going to Stanford MBA. So there's a little Stanford mafia going on over here. But Ginger.io's, as you will soon hear, is fascinating.
Great, thank you. First of all, I'm excited excited to be here, and I've enjoyed the presentation so far. And I'm excited to tell you a little bit about how at Ginger.io we're taking Quantified Self and bringing it into the doctor's office and into the healthcare system so that you're able to get the feedback you need to change your health, not only from you and your data, but from your doctor and the other members of your care team. Okay, so just a quick intro about me. I think Rajiv covered most of this, but kind of, I've always been interested in healthcare and especially interested in how we fix the system and use these big sources of data to really make sure that we're making a difference in changing how care is delivered. So Ginger.io, we're a startup. We're about 3 years old. We came out of MIT's Media Lab based in Boston and San Francisco. We're venture funded by True Ventures and Khosla Ventures. And we're really focused on this question of how do you bring big data analytics into the healthcare system and use all this data that we've all been collecting and that is increasingly mainstream to collect and use it to change how we deliver care today. So the question we're trying to fix is, or trying to answer is, when you think about how care is delivered today, it's an incredibly episodic way of delivering healthcare. You go to the doctor, they may take some biometric data or ask you some questions. It's point of time data. And to Rajiv's point about the time lag earlier, there's a huge time lag between any data that might be collected then and what's actually going on for you between visits. So you may go in, you may have your blood pressure score, you may look at a blood glucose test, but it doesn't really link with what's going on when you're outside of that doctor's office. And if you think about the traditional tools that are being used to collect data today, they're pretty cumbersome or pretty burdensome to the patient. It's paper diaries, it's blood glucose tools, and it's wearable sensors that are not as accessible to the general public as we'd like them to be. And even when that data is then delivered to the doctor, it's often delivered at that next checkup 3 months later, and there's no way to take action then. So our vision is a world where we take care from episodic to continuous, where we're able to close that feedback loop and get data to the doctor in real time, or to a nurse or to someone who can reach out, talk to that patient, and help you make the behavior changes that are going to improve your health status. And the way we do this is through your cell phone. So this is one of the most ubiquitous devices on the market today, and it's an incredibly powerful computer. And by harnessing something that's already in the hands of increasing numbers of people, we're able to collect really powerful data around how you live your lives and turn that data into insight and then into action that's going to impact how we deliver care. So the Ginger.io platform consists of 3 parts. The first part is a smartphone app that sits on your Android or iPhone and collects 2 types of data. The first type of data is passive data, and this is data from the sensors that are already in your phone. So we're talking about GPS data, movement data, so how much you're walking and biking, how much you're driving, and how far you're going from your home on a regular basis. We're also looking at communication data on Android. So we're looking at how many phone calls you're making, how much you're texting, not what you're saying, but what those patterns of communication are. Are you talking to the same people every day? Or is it really unlikely that we're going to know who's calling when you pick up the phone? We're also able to look at things like screen time as a proxy for sleep, and also for a proxy for anxiety or distraction if you think about that checking your phone when you're nervous about something behavior. In addition, we are able to bring in data from other sensors, so something like a LumaBac may one day be a complement to the data we're collecting. In addition to the passive data from the app, we're also collecting self-report data. So we're asking you questions about your mood, we're asking you questions about your symptoms. And not only are these questions giving us valuable data, but they're giving you that moment to reflect on how you're doing that achieves many of those reflection goals that Rajiv talked about earlier. The second part of our system is kind of the heart of what we do, and that's a behavioral analytics engine that was developed at MIT and uses really sophisticated machine learning to look for patterns in all that great data we're collecting. We're able to look at things like how much you've called, how much you've moved, and what mood you reported to start to understand what a normal day looks like for you. Our system is then able to look at how many normal days you're having in a row and look for changes. If all of a sudden we notice that someone who's usually traveling 5 miles from work to home, making 5 phone calls, and doing about 30 minutes of active walking is starting to change their patterns, they're not leaving the house or they're going really far, they're talking to many more people or not talking to anyone at all, it suggests that something has changed for them, whether it's a health condition or something else, and it triggers an alert in our system that says, hey, we may want to get in touch with that patient and see what's going on. Maybe it's a change in health condition, and if we can trigger that, and we can pinpoint something that's wrong now, we can be preventative in how we deliver care. The third part of our system closes that loop and delivers that alert to someone who can make a difference. Right now, we're focusing primarily on delivering that alert to physicians and caregivers so that doctors are able to reach out to their patients who they think, for instance, might be slipping into a depressive episode and talk to them before they kind of slip further. We're also experimenting with closing that loop by delivering that alert to caregivers. So what if you could get an alert when it looked like your grandmother or mother wasn't doing well? And finally, given that this is a quantified self audience, we're looking at how we deliver that information and those alerts back to the patients and back to individuals so that we're able to take actions for our own health. And so for now, from a business perspective, the question we're trying to answer for our clients is, if I've got 300 patients with a chronic condition, how do I use this data to know which 30 of those patients I should call today to make a difference in their care? To give you just a quick overview of the product, this is the smartphone app. It's pretty lightweight right now, designed really not to place a burden on the patient, to collect that passive data and those few self-report questions in a way that allows you to go about your day. We have notifications, surveys, health tips, which is a great way for the doctor to communicate with the patient and to share information about their condition, as well as insights into your own behavior. How much are you traveling? Are we noticing that your communication patterns are changing? Are there things that we know about you through this data that you may not be aware of every day? We're then feeding all that information into a provider dashboard that allows your doctor to see across their population who they actually need to talk to and who they might be able to intervene with before something goes wrong. So an example of how all of this works from a data perspective. So this is an example from some of the work we did back at MIT and how this behavioral data actually translates to recognizable patterns that we can pick up. So this is an example from a study where we were looking at depression, and we found that for individuals who are living with depression, there were real changes in communication patterns and in movement patterns that signified they might be having a symptomatic day. So really understanding how you live your life, which is something we can understand just from how you use your phone and how you carry your phone around with you, is a direct line to your health status that we may not have had before. To give you another example, this is data from a project we just completed a few months ago, so this is probably the first time anyone's talked through this data in public, but we looked at patients with a chronic condition who were at risk for mood and anxiety as a result of living for a chronic condition. And one of the triggers we found as a marker that something might be going wrong was a greater proportion of missed calls in people who reported a bad mood. And our hypothesis here is that when people were in a poor mood, they were screening calls and they were choosing who to talk to. So our system is able to kind of, in the next set of patients who are using the technology, see this pattern of behavior and trigger an alert that that may be someone who's in a poor mood because their call screening has increased. And so the final thing just to end on as we think about the potential of this technology is always to talk about patient privacy. We are a company that's not only dealing with a lot of tracking data, but we're dealing with health data, and we're very, very focused on making sure that the data is opt-in, controlled by the patient, and that we're always delivering value in return for that data, whether that's value through this feedback loop and better patient-provider connection, value through connection to a loved one who has a sense of how you're doing, or value through connection to yourself and a better understanding of your data and your health. Great. I look forward to taking questions during the Q&A.
Entrepreneur, a filmmaker, and probably most importantly, my friend. So Sky was part of the U.S. Olympic team on his bicycle back in '96 in Atlanta and in 2000 in Sydney, then went off to UC San Diego and then got into the world of business where he's since run a company doing sort of assisting the real estate industry. And along the way, I won't steal too much of his story, but he let his health get away from him and got into quantified self and so forth to get back in things, and did so to the extent that just a couple of years ago he set new world records in bicycling. He's made some films, and he's also been working with athletes in both the London Olympics, which he's going to tell you about, and then coming up in Rio. So he has a ton of sort of real world experience making some sense of this data.
Thanks, Raj. Appreciate it. Like Dave mentioned before, you have this continuum, where there's early adopters on the disease management end on one side and kind of elite athletes and fitness freaks on the other hand, so I guess I'll be speaking from that end of it. And I think, while it is a very niche, specialized market as far as a business opportunity, there are a lot of trickle-down benefits, of course, but also I think in that market, in professional sports and Olympic sports, you're going to have things opening up quite a bit as doping really becomes clamped down on and better controlled. So the project we did last summer was working with the US women's cycling team, and the question was how to make up over 5 seconds in just 3 months, and obviously without introducing performance-enhancing drugs, on very little budget as well. So that was the question that we were asking. Just my background, I was a cyclist on the US national team in the late 90s and early 2000s, and part of this project called Project 96, which is still the most well-funded cycling development performance program to date. That's the Superbike 2 right there that looks kind of like a boomerang. You may have remembered that from the Atlanta Olympics. We were very good at, we had early success in quantifying power output on a bicycle. You have stress meters inside the cranks. And we did heart rate zone training and things that have gone on to be utilized in spin classes and things like this. But we weren't very good at understanding how each athlete was responding as an individual to the training. This is kind of how the model worked. You would have this training program, and this was based primarily on the Eastern Bloc methodology. All the Russian and German athletes had state-funded drug programs, and so they hired all the best scientists and doctors, and they put this program together, and they were winning all the medals, for a good decade there. And the basis of it was, taking this program and kind of dictating it out to the athletes, and it's without much feedback provided. And it works well if you have a lot of athletes, but if you don't, in this case, a lot of them would either break or, like I mentioned, they'd require performance-enhancing drugs just so that they could respond, recover fast enough, get ready for the training the next day. So this was a program that we were actually using for Project 96. I was in that group of 5 athletes, and I was adamantly against doping, which created some friction, and you see these big splits within the group. I think this is what you saw with Lance Armstrong in the Tour de France. Obviously he dominated for a long period of time. A lot of insiders were very aware of the doping that was going on, but that rift that I was talking about, between the people who are doping and the people who aren't. If you're not, it's very frustrating because these guys are blowing your doors off every day, and no matter what you do, you're getting pounded into the ground, you're getting sick, you're getting injured. And that's eventually what drove, I think, Floyd Landis to come out and send those text messages and get the dominoes falling. And now we see it's a good, more than half of the field, and that's just the known offenders. And so we're talking about a huge, huge problem. We see this now with Barry Bonds and everything else in sports. So what this did, though, was it kind of lit a fire under me and drove me through the years to try to find a better way that didn't include doping. And I had a partner in this as well, Adam Laurent, who was also, he would actually wear a white armband in races, and it would say clean. And he would race with this thing, just to kind of make that point. And, the crazy thing was he was in the minority, and one of the very few that would speak out. So he and I joined up. I was inspired by a TED Talk that I saw down in San Diego by Dr. Eric Topol. And as Raj mentioned, I was a little bit depressed, and kind of, as I retired, it didn't happen in a good way because I was very frustrated, and I went to Seattle and started an internet company called Picasso. Thought my fitness would carry me through. I was very sedentary, to your point about the posture and all of this work around activity tracking. It's essential because your body will atrophy and fall apart so fast. And I was to the point where I could barely walk around. I had high blood pressure, had a heart attack scare, went to the hospital, decided, I really needed to go in a different direction. And Dr. Eric Topol is, visioning this new, on the medical side of embracing a lot of this technology. So I did an experiment inspired by him, and the shift really was in putting the athlete at the center of the system and orienting all of the data, the feedback, the support around the athlete as an individual. And that's where I got excited in hearing Dr. Topol's vision that we have the tools now to finally understand an individual response like we couldn't before. We couldn't in Project 96. And so I executed this plan for about a year, about a full year, and this is me on the velodrome, by the way, and broke a world record, and that was at 35 years old. So this was doing times faster than when I was in my 20s, which was pretty exciting to me. The problem was the US cycling team did not send a men's group to London. There have been some funding issues. We find out now, Armstrong had worked with an investment banker named Thomas Weisel here in Silicon Valley to buy out the US governing body, USA Cycling, and form this Tailwind Sports and back, the Postal Service team, which we all know where that led. And the counter effect of that was you have these sub-disciplines like track cycling and mountain biking. The amateur sports had really have dried up, through the decade as this happened. So no men's team for me. I decided to help my women counterparts in an event called the Women's Team Pursuit. And so I flew over to Mallorca, Spain to meet up with, there were 4 girls, and these are 2 of them here, Jenny Reed and Dotsie Bosch. The great thing about the velodrome is it's incredibly controlled environment. When you're marathon running or road cycling, you have variables like weather, crashes. The velodromes are very stable. I mean, we're talking exact temperatures every day, exact lighting conditions. And so that was going for us. What wasn't going for us was we showed up to 1 staff member on the ground for 4 athletes. And I mean, we're against Australia and Great Britain, who have 10-to-1, staff to athlete ratios. These programs are very well developed. So in kind of working with that, we had the husbands band together and figure out how to change gears and be mechanics. And on the data end, we would set up on the stationary bikes and on the track bikes, we pull the data after every session, which looks like this. This is an SRM power data signature. This is in a software called Training Peaks. It's overlaid with heart rate and elevation and some other things. Not very user-friendly, as you can see. If you guys can make sense out of that, I really can. So, we would pull averages and total kilojoules and other metrics from that. So back to the, kind of this digital health model. So we started off with each athlete with a genetics test. A full panel from nutrigenomics to, disease risk. A lot of cool stuff that you get out of these reports. Even the gene, the sprinter gene for fast twitch muscle fiber. You get results on that. And one of the girls, the thinner endurance girls, was actually very surprised in seeing that she had the sprinter gene. When we got the results back. So, and then specifically, you can fine tune supplements, like, your nutrigenomics panel may come back saying you need to pay particular attention because you have, genetic markers associated with an underlying need for vitamin E, folic acid, D vitamins, things like that. We also used a blood biomarker analysis, this company called Inside Tracker, and we found with one of the athletes, she had significantly low vitamin D level. I mean, we're talking almost nothing. And who knows how long she had been racing. And this is a world-class athlete with a severe vitamin D deficiency. They only had the budget to blood test officially through sports science once a year. So in getting this much more frequently and seeing these markers, not only that, but what you can do about the markers. So Inside Tracker gives, dietary suggestions, things like that we use just to kind of simplify that part of it. Sleep is obviously very important for recovery. We use the Zeo, which we've discussed a lot today. Zeo is great. It's the only device we could find that measured the actual brain waves and accurate deep sleep numbers. So one of the interesting things was, this is in the Zeo account in its silo, And with athletes, I observed this in myself in the spring training when I was going for the world record, but we would see declines in deep sleep over time. And I wasn't sure why. The athletes had the same question of, why that would be dropping. And I'll show you the results to that in a second. Another sensor called Dexcom. Now this is continuous blood glucose monitoring. So every 5 minutes, and a little sensor you wear in your stomach here, you're getting a reading. And the results look like this. So, right away, we got some insights, and I'm never going to think about diet or nutrition the same way ever again after wearing the sensor. Because you see things like how your blood sugar is dropping overnight. And that's, no matter how you would finger prick, you're not going to wake up every hour and get a blood glucose reading. So you see the spikes and the drops through the day. This is actually during training. You expect rises from adrenaline, of course. But the post-training, we would see some of these recovery drinks are marketed, like fastest absorption of any other drink, and it's like 80 grams of simple sugar. Yeah, it's absorbing fast, but what happens afterwards? And even in these short windows, we would get these essentially, rebound hypoglycemia, you get these steep drops. So we immediately made adjustments, to drink compositions and things like this. Now all those are great, but they're still in the silos. So what we wanted to do was start connecting all of this data together. You spoke about this, and the medical side, there's work being done. Here we were, just figuring this out as we went. And so you get these nice XYs, in different areas of data, but the question is, how do these come together? We were putting all this data into a database that was on my laptop, and it quickly got to the point of not even opening. So we were using a few different tools. We got in a serious, bind because I couldn't even access the data, let alone analyze it. So Silicon Valley, thank you very much, entrepreneurs like you, a company called Datamere, who is doing big data analytics, and I had a call with them, and they assumed our database and put together this result for us, just a preliminary, obviously very limited data, only 3 girls as N of 1s, but this is an example of one girl's interconnections between some of the different areas that we were measuring. And from that, we got to some of the cross influencers, which I'll get to in a second here. So I met with them, showed them the results. Interventions we made immediately. One of them was light levels. So usually light box therapy is reserved for seasonal affective and treating depression. We're not interested in not being depressed. We're trying to kind of push the envelope of human performance. So we saw that when they were getting very strong early morning light, it was reducing their sleep latency later that night, which was then in turn improving the quality of the sleep, and then the watts on the bicycle the next day would be a little bit higher. And we saw how these things were kind of connected in a compounding way. So if they could get sunlight, without sunglasses, first thing in the morning, about 30, 40 minutes, usually you go out and that's the first thing you do, you put the sunglasses on because you're like, oh, it's bright. And if they couldn't do that, they would use the light boxes. And this is actually in the Olympic Village where they have these set up. Okay, this is the XY for this. So as the lumens increase in that early part of the day, you get lower latency. Now this goes back to the deep sleep. Why was it declining every month? And it came back to one of the insights I made by myself, and this proved to be the case for each individual girl, was that as the rooms started getting a little bit hotter there in Spain, one girl had AC, the other 2 did not, their deep sleep levels dropped. And they were still getting the same total sleep times, maybe 8 or 9 hours. But we would have never known this hadn't we had the Zeo sensor. And so the intervention was a water-cooled mattress pad that we could set down, and it was different for every girl, but for example, one girl she responded well to very cold sleeping, 63 degrees. And that's against the mattress where your core temperature is actually, dropping, and we'd have her exaggerate that effect by wearing a very, breathable shirt, no pants, no sleeves, and then wool socks, just to make sure that core temperature was dropping as much as possible. And the data responded really well. You see these 3 different instances on 3 different girls, and they were all improvements. Okay, so after training in Spain, sorry, I'm going a little bit over, but this is the end here. So we travel to London, and this was 3 months. We'd seen some improvements, but we still weren't sure how this was going to pan out because they were 5th place at the World Championships, and they, 5 seconds on the velodrome, that's half a track length to make up. And you have Australia and Great Britain in these well-funded programs. We had no idea how things were going to turn out. So, to add to pressure, it was kind of like the focus of the velodrome. You had Kate and the Prince were there, and it was kind of like the marquee event. Also, on the men's road cycling side for the US team, entire team withdraws from the Olympics right before, because it turns out they're all banned because of this drug report that came out with Lance Armstrong. So these are guys favored to win medals. Dave Zabriskie, Christian Bell, George Hincapie. So that, again, ratchets up the pressure on us, because it's like, wow, this is our little group here is the only hope really for a medal. So we go into the ride, we qualify 2nd, which was amazing. And then we got into the semifinal, but it was against Australia. And I got to admit, I was doubtful, because I know AIS, Australian Institute of Sport, they're a phenomenal program. And I was thinking, well, hey, at least we qualified 2nd, and that's something to be proud of. But they got in the semifinal ride against Australia, and they were 2 seconds down in the middle of the ride. Again, I thought there's no way that they're going to come back from this. Somehow, these girls, the 3 of them, just started going for it. Lap after lap after lap, bringing that gap down, 1 second, 0.8, 0.6, 0.4, and we're down to the last lap, and it's head-to-head. And they go across the line, and the US team wins. So that guarantees them at least a silver medal against the final against Great Britain. This is the girls right after that, obviously not expected, very much underdogs. This is a photo here from the podium. You can see they ultimately lost against Great Britain, but I like to say they won the silver medal, because I don't think any of us expected that this was going to happen. So there's actually this is just a photo of them. This is us with them right afterwards, just taking some photos. And there's a documentary being made about this whole story called Personal Gold that will be coming out next spring, and airing maybe on NBC Universal Sports, maybe ESPN Films. We're working with them to see where that's going to go. Certainly be available on Netflix and iTunes and things like that. On the business side, we are trying to distill a few of those most essential things that we saw, and I've seen through the decades, as being like non-negotiables if you want to strengthen the systems in your body, for health and performance. Again, lots of trickle-down effect. So optimized athlete. And then to leave you with, sorry, I went way over. I'll just show you the trailer for the documentary. It's actually a 1-minute teaser, and you'll see everything I was just talking about. All right, thanks. Here's the movie. And this is actually this is the healthcare version, so it's framed a little bit towards kind of the digital medicine audience.
Technologies, supercharged by mobile, will catalyze what he describes as the biggest shakeup in the history of medicine. Dr. Eric Topol.
Disgraced cycling superstar Lance Armstrong, stripped of his medals and out of millions of dollars in endorsements for years of alleged doping.
Approaching $3 trillion a year for health care. $1 trillion a year is waste because of his unmatched treatments that induce horrible side effects. We have now learned about a natural way to get high performance athletics.
USA, very tight across the line!
Because of these tools just now showing up that are so transformative, if we use them, we can really change the whole face of healthcare. What we need to do now is take this to the normal health sphere. That is, in each individual, going to unlock secrets for them.
There you go, personal goal. All right, thanks guys.
So I was actually in Australia when those Olympics were going on, and those people were not happy campers. Their big swimmer didn't do so hot, and so forth. So I trust all of you are working hard on coming up with some brilliant questions. So I probably won't have to use mine here, but I'll have one. So I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and just go throw this out there, which is, as you know, many of you have been at this for quite a long time in different ways. What one thing might you say has been most surprising to you, either as a success or as a failure, that just did not work out the way you had expected?
I guess I can take it. Just speaking from the project last summer, I mean, I think this issue with data management was really huge and very stressful. And so I'd like to invite collaboration, ideas, solutions, anything around how to make that easier, to integrate between different standards, different streams, just the sheer size. We're working with DataMirror in the coming years to do that, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions there. So, these devices, again, great in their silos, but how do we pull all these together? Because I think that's where the gold is. That's where the insights are.
For us, I think it's around the human element of data and the importance of this data to drive connection. I think when we started, we were really focused on taking all burden away from the user. We were a Quantified Self app called Daily Data for about a month and a half. And as we've grown and evolved, we've really found that this data is most powerful when it's enabling a connection, whether it's between the patient and the provider, the patient and a caregiver, or even the patient themselves, taking that moment to reflect, get their insights, or get that question. So really focusing on this data as a way to connect and use it to create action, as opposed to just kind of looking at it as data for data's sake.
I think the most impactful thing for us is learning about the importance between product market fit. When we first started out with LumoBack, we were very focused on back pain because of my co-founder's history. But what we found, for example, after we did our Kickstarter campaign, we had 1,600 backers within 1 month. And we asked them, why do you care about posture so much that you collectively have given us $200,000 on a product that doesn't even exist yet? And we were surprised that back pain was one motivator for a group, but appearance and confidence was another motivator, as well as for others it was general health and wellness. And it was both exciting to us because we're like, wow, even bigger market opportunity than we thought. But then it's also scary because how do you make a product that's going to, delight somebody who's motivated by back pain versus motivated by appearance versus other things. And so as an early stage startup, figuring that out and making the right bets, because you can't do it all, has been probably one of the hardest things.
I'll just toss in my own answer to that. Is,
Can you use these mics too?
Oh, great. So not to stereotype Gujaratis in the US, but I have tons of doctors in the family. It seems to be part of the birth contract that you have some of those. So, my grandfather, aunts, uncles, cousins, and so forth. So not being in the health industry, I, for the longest time, just sort of assumed that they knew what they were talking about. And so I had more or less the same impression about people taking care of their health as presumably most of you do, which is that we don't. And so the most surprising thing I've learned in sort of 8 years of working on this is that I think we have it really, really backwards. What is astounding to me is how much effort and time and care people put into their health when they have so many other things on their plate. And so if you frame the problem as how do we get people to put more effort into their health, you'll come up with solutions that probably don't match the reality of what people are already doing. So that learning for me, which I have since come to find, most of my doctor relatives actually agree with, but so maybe it was just this general perception. But that was the thing that was most surprising to me. So do people out there have any questions? Start over there.
So I have a question for Manisha. Two questions actually. So why did you guys go to Kickstarter? And the second was, what are the learnings you have from your campaign?
Our primary reason for doing Kickstarter is we wanted market validation. We, as entrepreneurs, it's very common that, you're given the pat on the back of go for it, and when it's ready, sign me up. We wanted to know, if we build it, will they come? Is there truly a market here? Because if there wasn't, we didn't want to continue investing more time and more resources in a direction we felt good about, but was not proven in the market. So market validation was the most important. And what we got out of it, in addition to the capital, because it helped to fund our initial production run of our very first batch of Lumovacs, it gave us the opportunity to get a better sense of product market fit. So we treated our first 1,600 customers as our best customers. We really tried to learn about them, their motivations. We also really took their feedback and said, hey, help us make this product better. This is our first generation product. And so we really tried hard to listen to them so that it informed a second generation product that we recently launched.
Perhaps we could add on that, just have all of you comment on what efforts you've made to raise funds and where you've been successful in the different.
Yeah, so we went the venture route, starting out with the Techstars Accelerator in Boston, piloting that into a seed round, and then most recently raising our Series A this November, led by Khosla. And I think for us, the reason to go the venture route was we are not a direct-to-consumer company. We're selling into an ecosystem where sales cycles are quite long. If anyone's ever either works for a hospital system or insurance company or sells into them, it's a long cycle. And for us, that balance between making sure that we were able to iterate fast, but really making sure we had the resources to allow us that runway to do our pilots, which are typically quite a bit longer, even above and beyond the sales cycle, and wanting to make sure that we were able to, have the resources to scale, grow, and hire lots and lots of engineers and data scientists, which is what you need to do when you're a data-driven company.
So the United States is one of the few countries that does not directly support athletes for Olympic competition. So Canada, for example, if you're a great athlete, you make a certain mark through results and you get carded and you're given $3,000 a month. So with the US, it's all corporate support based. And with the recession, obviously a lot of companies pulled back. There's also a great opportunity there. So what we found last summer was the opportunity for partnerships, smaller companies that were rapidly growing, a couple in Silicon Valley and a couple across the US became our partners. And then we also self-funded quite a bit. And then for the film, we've done an Indiegogo campaign, and this is just building a community of people who want to hear stories like this. So combination of those three things has been our strategy so far.
So my question is for Julia. How do you, when you go to a hospital or a healthcare system, how do you quantify the value that your product might be able to provide?
So I think that's literally the $1 million question. So, we think about it in terms of the triple aim, which is how do we kind of lower the cost of care while improving quality and improving outcomes. So we look at kind of the things we can quantify, which is thinking about the actual dollars put against readmissions. We talk a lot about right-sizing care. Can we get someone to the urgent care clinic in terms of the emergency room and, use medical outcomes data against that? So, really trying to think about the data that our partners can contribute that we can benchmark against to show cost savings. But we also think a lot about qualitative markers of improved care. And, I've talked a lot about patient-provider connection, but one of the reasons for that is, when hospitals do exit surveys, you get really low markers on how good was my care, how in control of my condition am I, how connected to my hospital or my doctor do I feel. And, being able to do surveys and showing market impact on that is both incentivized by the Affordable Care Act, but also really important to hospitals who are increasingly being forced to act, to compete in a market where customer service and a good customer experience is a big driving factor for them.
So can I just follow on
Sure.
with one question? So on the qualitative side, there seems to be a conflict between what the hospital wants to achieve and what the patient is ready to do, from what you explained. If it's a question of carrying this device around with you or be strapped on, hospital is able to monitor where you're going, what your activities are. Does that ever?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and that's where, I think I ended on our commitment to privacy, and I think that's kind of what that leads into. So for us, it's defining very clearly what data the hospital gets and making sure that we're able to really preserve patient privacy. And for us, that line is, the only location we'll ever look at is if you go to another hospital, because it's important for hospitals to know where their patients are receiving care, especially if it's outside of the system. Otherwise the data we're looking at is just kind of sheer miles traveled. We're not reading communication, and we're really focused on how do we walk that line of making sure that patient privacy comes first while still being able to deliver value to our partners.
There's a question over there. I think it's gone away.
Question here. A question for the move back device, very, very fascinating device. I was just curious if you had any data beyond, so the posture, for example, does it help people, keep their backs in better shape? Is it always around age? Or, what additional data can you help us with in terms of understanding the value of this product? And what plans do you have for collecting this kind of data?
Sure, we're in the early stages of that, but what we are doing, in addition to saying, okay, how much do we help people improve their posture? And we find that vast majority of our customers, we can see the data, and they also give us self-reported data, but also correlating their movements with other aspects of their well-being, whether it's mood or whether it's sleeping or stress levels, being able to sort of correlate not only your posture, but your sitting time versus your standing time with all these other biometrics. And whether we're collecting those biometrics or we connect to other companies that do it, we're very open to that, to those possibilities.
I was wondering, in terms of your experience helping people with their posture and their back pain, we have both these new devices like yours, but we also, in a sense, have people that are experts in this, that are coaches. And I've had back pain in the past, and as I came to discover, one of the kids in the neighborhood in Bubblenut that I never paid any attention to, all of a sudden is this woman teaching me how to stand properly over here in Palo Alto. And that human experience turns out to be really important. And I get that impression from what you did as well, that it wasn't just having all these sensors, it's you and Tamara and all that were being able to provide kind of the human feedback. And so how do we combine both the sensors and these human coaches?
In our case, we find the high touch and the high tech coming together, for example, through chiropractors and physical therapists. They love LumoBack because it helps to extend their reach. What they say is, this is a way I can watch my patients when I can't watch them. And they don't mean it in a big brothery sort of way. What they mean it is look, they can only control what their patient does for that 1 hour a week that they're with them, but they can't really help them as much when they're out. And they get frustrated that they spend this time with them, talking to them about good posture, then they go back to work, sitting in front of the computers doing this all the time. And so they really embrace it as a way to extend their reach and their care, as a way to improve compliance, because the patient feels more motivated, the patient is more bought in, there's something fun, real-time feedback. So in our case, that's where we're seeing the offline world and the online world coming together.
Right. Yeah, similar kind of thing with the athletes. One of the three, actually, when we kind of exit surveyed them, she said that the fact that we were there caring was such a huge part of them feeling supported, which they've been struggling with the lack of support for so long. That was definitely one of those. So my hope is that by shifting awareness in the right places with people, one of the things we did was just subjectively track psychometrics. So it was mood and state of mind and emotional state. And I think them, from what I observed, them becoming more aware of those mental states and those emotions, even without a human touch point, was a positive thing.
So, with the exception of your talk, which I found very well balanced, right? And maybe this is a subjective perception. I found that the pre-dinner panel was either one can call it pessimistic or pragmatic about things. Whereas post-dinner channels much more
blood sugar levels. We're euphoric right now. So.
You know, if I was exceptional in this observation, or what you might sort of account for the difference, and in particular, but perhaps Julie could comment. I'm fairly sure that a number of startups would have gone with pretty much the same kind of rationale, and perhaps even the same kind of solution, and have been unsuccessful in raising funding, say, from serious venture capitalists, right? So what was it you think was different about your pitch or your effort?
Yeah, so I think for us it was two things. I think the first was the device we were using to collect this data is incredibly ubiquitous, and it's increasing penetration. It's now the sort of thing that when people come into money, it's the first thing they buy is a smartphone, and you know, it's more and more grandmothers are being given it to communicate with their grandkids. So all of a sudden, increasingly diverse demographic groups have access to the smartphone, and thus we have access to that type of data. You know, I think the second thing for us was the strength of our technology and our analytics. I think what causes a lot of people to be pessimistic about this type of technology is it's a lot of data, and it's not clear what the insight that is to be gleaned from that data and the action that's taken as a result of that data, and especially how that action, especially within the healthcare system, fits into existing workflows. And I think what makes our solution unique is we're collecting data that's really, really easy to collect from a lot of people, and we're approaching it not as we're going to give you that data back in the set of graphs. We're going to use our analytic techniques to look for the really simple alerts that tell you when to do something in a way that fits very simply into your workflow. And I think it's that combination of easy to collect data that's not a huge burden, really strong analytics that focus on finding that action, and a focus on fitting that action into workflow makes us unique. And I think that's kind of what was attractive to a lot of our investors and a lot of our partners, is that we're looking for solutions that are going to work within a system and help that system move to the next stage and really disrupt from within, using really simple things like smartphones that are in everyone's pocket.
So the typical venture question, how is this a sustainable differentiation, doesn't come into play in this. I mean, if it's, because analytics are, anybody can be sophisticated like analytics. A simple device, you gather simple data.
Yeah, it's a fair question. So I mean, I think from our standpoint, data collection itself is going to be commodified. It's going to be, or commoditized. It's not going to be just smartphone data. It could be LumoBack data. It could be biometric data. You know, and I think where our advantage comes in is first the sophistication of our analytics, but also the data that we're collecting now and those signatures now. So that when we go into the market, we're going in with, you know, hundreds of thousands of patients, and we know that signature is, so we're able to sell a product that's ready now. So there may be competition, but we believe that with the sophistication of our analytics and the size of our data sets, we're going to have that answer and stay ahead of the competition.
Yeah, and can I add two things? Because I think great question. I mean, we are, you know, I'm so excited and euphoric about the possibilities of this, you know, just after a decade of frustration and seeing there is another way other than doping. And maybe in, you know, consumers, it could be ways other than taking a pill and, you know, generating the strength of the systems in your body for long-term, you know, well-being and things that are sustainable. So the two things from the project, one is that obviously we're in a bubble, and athletes are, you know, we're just starving for anything that can give us an advantage. So we trust it in that way. We know the end is going to be for your own success. The bubble started popping a bit when we got to London, because I talked to a journalist and she was asking some weird questions during the interview. You know, I was kind of probing. I got the sense that there was something else here. So I just gave her, you know, the normal athlete questions about things we were trying to improve. A couple days later, Financial Times on the front page runs this article about how athletes are giving up their data to these companies that are then going to use it for who knows what. And I couldn't believe my eyes. And the Telegraph, Daily Mail, everyone picked it up, CNN. And that's where I started thinking, okay, there are some very real considerations here as far as data privacy. So the second part of that is with Zio. Great device, we're still looking for replacement because it's been sold and bought. The transition didn't go so well. So all the data, all the sleep data is now gone off the server. The new buyers did not notify the clients. We had the data on the server, so I had my own data on the server. As far as we know now, it's gone. So, tip there, if you're creating a company and it's, your data's going down, definitely give it to the client before you shut everything off. So that was kind of a harsh thing that we learned there. So.
Can I just reflect on your comment? Because I think, in fact, you're absolutely right. Most, in a sense, the panelists were chosen because they've had some success. I could rattle off a zillion companies that simply don't exist anymore, so they're not going to come on stage to talk about that. Also, this is, from a business point of view, this is all very new. There's a lot of experimentation going on. Most of the companies, in fact, will fail. It's sort of guaranteed. A few will succeed, and it'll be partly because they'll actually have a product that's delivering real value. But just as important, if not more, they'll be lucky. For any of us who've done any companies, well, in any space, luck plays an enormous role. So we can all give you sort of the logical answers why this thing was the one that won out, but honestly, it's just sort of the right conversation at the right time. And that's what you want. I mean, Zio is a very interesting example. The company started off, so it's a little headband, you wear it when you go to sleep. When these guys at Brown came up with the idea, what they wanted was not a sleep tracker. They wanted a smart alarm clock because they had learned from their studies that if you wake up at just the right time, in the sense of how you're thinking at the moment while you're asleep, then you wake up refreshed. Whereas if you wake up 15 minutes later, you might actually be waking out of a sleep state that's less conducive to jumping up and doing stuff. So they created this sensor to track their brainwaves so that they wanted to wake up around 6:30. The device would wake them up around 6:30, but when their brains were sort of in the right state. That was their goal. And then they made this thing, and they're like, oh, we have data for the whole night, not just when we want to wake up. Isn't that interesting? And they got a lot of people sort of responded positively to that, so they made a business. It took off in the QS world. Everybody loves this thing, except for those of us who can't seem to sleep with some headband on. It doesn't work. But anyways, they were wildly successful. But in a sense, they got lots of VC funding, of course, all of which had demands on growth and so forth. They simply wanted to be a sensor company, but they were being pushed into being a sleep coaching company. And honestly, the transition didn't work out well. So one of the first successes is also one of the first nice flameouts. But that's the nature of the beast. There's
I had a question for all three. I think it's kind of interesting that each of your companies and services had a different funding route. Manisha, you went with Kickstarter. Julie, you went the VC route, and your partnerships as well as Indiegogo. Could you tell the audience a little more about why and how you're successful? You told us why you went that route, but how you're successful in that route.
So we did do Kickstarter, but we have also raised both a seed round as well as a Series A with institutional funding. We did the Kickstarter in between. I think the reason why we've been successful is we focus on a very clear problem to solve. And today it's been posture and back pain. Back pain is the second most common reason why people go to the doctor. It's a $50 billion a year problem. It's outnumbered only by the common cold in terms of doctor visits. And you will see that as we roll out other products, is this laser focus on solving real problems. Because if you solve real problems, you're going to create value.
I think for us, it's a combination of a really big vision for that disruptive product that's going to be the billion-dollar idea, backed up with data. So we were coming in with that market sizing and that idea and that vision, and we had 6 years of MIT Media Lab data. We had clear graphs that this worked, and we were able to kind of show you that we had the technology to back up the vision. And I think that combination really helped us kind of, capture the imagination, but also the the pocketbook of the VCs we were working with?
Certainly passion has to be present, and I think just this fire I talked about that was lit under me from this doping frustration was a huge driver, because it's undoubtedly a lot of work. We went through 80, 90, 100-hour weeks with our small team, so I think you gotta love what you're doing. That's the key thing. The other thing we really drew upon as a resource was an advisory board. And for us, that was huge, because we had expertise very narrowly, but where we couldn't, cover certain issues, we had everything from a physician to a data scientist to a Navy SEAL, to deal with team dynamic issues and some things on the human side that data can't answer. So diversifying a team of expert advisors is really key for us anyway.
I want to challenge you just a little bit on, and of course the cell phone is very ubiquitous, but it's also somewhat limited in what it can do. And maybe there are other sensors that come along. Just in my own family, my mother-in-law is starting to get up there in age, and there's actually no way that she would be able to use and understand the cell phone anymore. So it seems like, and maybe you can comment on that, what other sources of data do you envision that might help you accomplish your mission? Because the cell phone alone may not give you everything that's needed in the end from all populations.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point and a good question. To take a step back, what we're really focused on is this idea that behavioral analytics and the idea of understanding the actions that comprise how we go about our day should be as important a health marker as biometric data. So we started with the smartphone because it's a really good sense of behavior data, and it is probably the most ubiquitous of all the sensors that are out there. Clearly, it's not in all demographics, although we're hoping that's going to continue to change. So as we think about it, additional tools are going to be any other sensors that's collecting behavior data. So something like Lumobac that's looking at how much you're standing up, how much you're moving around. Fitbit, that's a Fitbit or a Shine that has a much better step count and is much more focused on that. And really thinking about how do we collect that behavior data, but also recognizing that, it's going to be steps and it's going to be focusing on certain conditions and certain demographics to validate this idea of behavior analytics as we ultimately work towards a world where this data is available on everyone and we're able to use it to help people across a variety of groups with a variety of conditions.
I'd also just sort of add to that, because this question comes up all the time that, you're making a $300 device, not everybody can afford it, or you're making a smartphone app, not everybody has a smartphone. And quite honestly, from being in the tech world my entire life, I find the premise of that sort of absurd, in the sense that you're making something that's useful for some population. It's useful for that population, even if it doesn't help everyone. For example, there's so many rare diseases in the sense that only a small percentage of the population have. So I know friends who have something called cystic fibrosis. Thank God it only affects 30,000 people, as opposed to 330 million Americans. But I'm really glad there are people working on sort of drugs for cystic fibrosis. And if it helps nobody else, it's worthwhile. I think the same thought pattern has to apply to all of these health and wellness gadgets and widgets and apps and so forth. That if it helps some group of people significantly, then it's worthwhile. And it may be a tremendous market, even if it's only helping a small group of people. Way back?
Yes, I have a question here. Pretty much for all the panelists, including those from the pre-dinner session, if they want to chime in. Actually, Vinod Khosla is quite famous for having made a stance that he thinks that I may be off of the numbers. In 20 years, 80% of what doctors do would be done by software, because all that they really are very highly trained expert systems, if you really think about it. But I don't see that happening unless all the data that Lumobac is doing, Ginger.io is doing, Optimized Athlete is doing, is all brought together in one place. do you see that data ever coming together? And if so, what do you think are the catalysts for that? Or are we forever doomed to depend on Fujitsu to bring things together with a tiny little...
Doomed?
Rachel, you want to jump up here?
Or just talk louder.
I think that, I don't have a long answer, but I think that is one potential way, or at least a starting way. It's certainly not through a startup that says, hey, you guys all need a place to put your data, we are a startup and you should put it on our platform. You probably won't exist next year. So I would much rather trust Fujitsu than a startup that doesn't have a product. Like one thing so I had my own startup, it didn't work out. I learned a lot about open source hardware business models and how difficult they are. But we were always told no platform without a killer app. So if you are Runkeeper, yes, you can have a platform. If you're Android, if you're Apple, you can have a platform. If you want to start your own company so that other people can pour their data into you, probably not. And with respect to will people still go to the doctor? I mean, a lot of people go to the doctor because they want somebody to talk to. And so the computer can do that, but my grandmother is not going to go talk to a computer and have that be the same as going to the doctor. So I think that the goal is not necessarily to replace doctors, but to use technology to scale the effective doctors and scale the human element more.
Frankly, in 20 years, this population is going to be very comfortable talking to a computer. And there'll be some part of the population which doesn't exist.
Do you like hanging out with your laptop as much as another person?
So I think we can do it.
Yeah, it's like saying you don't talk to people because you have Facebook.
This is just a question, you know, have all your data in one place. One could think of the internet as one place, right? But of course, it's also highly distributed. So I think what's going to happen is the data is going to be out there, and there'll be different patterns by which the data can be accessed by different subsets of applications. So it'll be in one place and distributed at the same time, if that makes any sense. With common enough standards, yeah. So, and I also think that the data that can cross-communicate will lag the data that there is, right? There'll always be new cool sensors and new cool capabilities coming out that aren't standardized and interoperable yet. So we'll live in this world with, you know, well, of course the LumaVac data, yeah, that's obviously fun, but, you know, but the newest, latest lab on a chip thing won't. And the other thing about Kosla's comment, you know, I heard this great metaphor today. It's this famous thing in neuroscience and consciousness. They say if someone who 500 years from now studies color vision, but is colorblind, and learns everything there is to know about color vision, understands it completely, and so they have full knowledge, right? And then one day their color vision is restored. Did they learn anything, right? Did their perception change? And I would argue that yes, it did. And I think that there's essentially a question, what is a doctor doing? And if the only things that you see the doctor doing are the tangible, quantifiable things, then the vast majority of what the doctor does will be replaced by a computer. I think that the kind of person who would make that statement that Khosla did probably doesn't see the rest of the stuff that the doctors are doing. It's not part of their field of view. They're sort of colorblind to it, if you will. And I think there's probably a lot of stuff that just isn't visible given that worldview.
So just to close up here, I'll add something to Vinod's comment, because I think he is being polite by using the figure that he uses. So let me give you just a slightly different perspective on the world of health things. That's agreeing with him. So for the vast majority of the human experience, you took care of yourself. Everybody took care of themselves. There really wasn't a choice in the matter. It's only been sort of the last 150 years or so that for those of us in the rich world, we've had the opportunity to visit some health professional to take care of our health. Today we have this perspective that the health professionals are taking care of our health. it turns out that this perspective does not match reality. The reality is that even today, for 99.99% of your lives, you are taking care of yourself. So I have data from the VA that shows the average VA patient, who are sicker than norm, get about an hour or two of time with healthcare professionals. That leaves 8,765 other hours that they're taking care of themselves. So even today, doctors and health professionals are dealing with 0.01% of health. And to what Dave's saying, the part that they do today, which is sort of robotic, yes, that will get replaced. The doctors that are doing the robotic stuff, who needs them? But the ones that are actually paying deep attention, who are bringing their expertise to bear on this particular problem that you have, they will still be absolutely necessary. I can't imagine any of us are going to be, resetting broken bones anytime in the near future, so the doctor's still going to be around. But we have to stop someplace, so we're going to stop there. Thank you all for being a fantastic audience, and thanks to all of our panelists now, as well as the earlier panel for being here.
Before we wrap up, if I may, I'd just like to make an announcement. IEEE ComSoc chapter will be holding a joint event with the IEEE Consumer Electronics Society on Saturday, the 5th of October, based on called the Screen in the Home, centered around television as well as smartphone and tablet screens. So we're also going to have a keynote on 4K television. So flyers are available as you need on the registration.